Welcome back to Flashback Files, where we help students, recent grads, and young professionals reflect on how early experiences shape confidence, identity, and the way we think about the future. Today's conversation is about what it looks like to grow up with a lot of potential and then try to figure out what to actually do with it. My guest today is Atticus. He's someone who, from a young age, stood out as a curious, intelligent, and naturally social individual, the kind of person who picked things up quickly and connected easily with others. But like a lot of people, that didn't necessarily translate into a clear or linear path through school or into early adulthood. In this conversation, we explore what it's like to move through the education system when things come easily, but motivation and structure don't always follow. We talk about navigating being labeled as gifted, the tension between interest and discipline, and how moments like COVID can shift confidence, identity, and direction in ways that weren't always obvious at the time. We also get into where Atticus is today, studying political science, exploring interests like philosophy and law, working multiple jobs, and starting to take more ownership over his direction. This is a conversation about self leadership in real time, about trying things, changing your mind, and figuring out who you are without having all the answers yet. Atticus, thanks for joining me today.
No issue.
So, Atticus, when you think about like back to yourself as a kid, what stands out to you most about who you were naturally?
I've always been really quite terribly introspective. I'd often be surrounded by people, and despite that, I'd be sort of lost in my own world, thinking to myself about all the intricacies of well, for example, the social interactions, or the people around me, the kind of individuals they were, who they'd grow up to be. For as long as I could remember, I'd been very, very lost in my own head, I suppose.
Okay, and is it out of maybe a natural sense of curiosity from you? Like, what do you think drives those questions internally about yourself from
I've
yourself?
always wanted to I've always wanted to learn all that I could. I think when I was 7 years old, I came to the conclusion that the only thing I want to do with my life is change something in a substantial way that helps to influence the lives of others. And that led, of course, to me going through as many avenues as I possibly could to learn as much as I possibly could so that I could reasonably make a new change in something pre established.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to dive into those different experiences that you had along the way. But before we get into that, you've been described as confident, energetic, curious, and someone who other kids naturally gravitated towards. Do you recognize that version of yourself when you hear that? Like, does that sound consistent with you?
I presume you got that from my mother. She she sees me as a lot more confident and energetic than I really am. I'm great at putting up a facade, though.
I'm busted. You got my source. Okay, so that's kind of an external portrayal then.
More or less, yeah.
Any sense of why that might be? Why it might not be as consistent with what you might be experiencing internally?
I think that it's difficult to express and appropriately convey what you're experiencing in your own head. Really, much more difficult than it is to just kind of be energetic, polite, and friendly, which most people find a lot more amiable than amicable. Sorry, than somebody who just kind of sits alone and thinks all day. I would describe that person as a loser. Well, I mean,
Come on. No. I think that I what I'm hearing is internally there's lots that goes on. We have thousands of thoughts that go on in our head. And there's probably a filter or two that come out when it comes to portraying ourselves to others. I think naturally lots of people do it. Some people do it better than others. So am I hearing it correctly that you are pretty good at filtering what might be going on in here before it comes
bang,
out?
yeah, bang on the money.
Okay. Okay, got it. One of your teachers called you the island and all the boats checked in with you. What do you think made people look to you so naturally at that age? Maybe what we just covered in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the effective portrayal of somebody who's a little more sociable than I really am is probably a contributing factor. But I think realistically, people just tend to like people who have something new and distinct to say, something interesting, really.
So you were able to come up with some good stuff to talk about at the sandbox or the playground.
Yeah, not to stroke my own ego, but I'd like to think so.
You were also described as someone who was constantly learning and reading and building things, making stop motion Lego films and exploring ideas. Do you think curiosity was always your strongest trait growing up? We talked about that earlier, but was it one of your strongest traits growing up, or is there something else that might trump it?
Curiosity is definitely in my top 3. I'd say it's pretty hard, given how much things switch around within me, but, I'd say curiosity has sort of always been a staple of who I am. Even all of my interests can be really appropriately boiled down to wanting to figure out more about something. I was an aspiring engineer for a while. I've always been into, politics and philosophy, and that's sort of just an extension of what I'm doing now. Psychology has definitely been an element of that, something I've always been talented in, but not super passionate about. Really, everything I've ever loved has been an extension of wanting to figure something out. And so, yeah, I think curiosity is an appropriate label.
Excellent. Okay, with your permission, we're going to touch on the medical experiences that you had when you're younger. So you
Sure.
experienced, from what I understand, a lot medically very early in life. And even if you may not have fully understood it at the time, but looking back now, how do you think that shaped the way your parents approached raising you?
My parents are I love them dearly, but I suppose the best way to describe them would be overzealous. They're very my mom's pretty neurotic and my dad's very particular. And I think a lot of that comes from the incredible specificity of my requirements as a child due to my kidney condition. I think I think it suited my parents rather well. I mean, my father's always been a mathematics guy and my mother's a political woman, so they've always been rather particular. But I think it really emphasized that. And I think it's made it pretty difficult growing up for my parents to really accept that I'm my own sort of unique, distinct individual because they had to spend so much of their lives coddling every little detail about my health.
And I guess when you look back, nobody's ever trained to handle something like that. So they seemed like they did a decent job of doing what they could do within their realm of information and understanding of what you had going on. And so what you're saying is you're right today, you're a byproduct of some of that exercising and being maybe ambitious with taking care of you. I'm trying to be like delicate here, but because your parents were just I'm sure love and adore you and just wanted the best for you. And but there are maybe some residual effects that come from that.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, we're all products of our parents and the circumstances that surround us. So, I mean, I'm really no more beholden to that than anybody else. It just so happens that my circumstances are a little more unique.
Do you think growing up with people being protective of you made you a little more cautious as a person yourself? Or have you ventured towards the opposite now that you are, you're an adult, you have your own freedom? What does that look like for you?
I'm pretty cautious, remarkably so, really, in terms of everything I do. I'm always very particular with the way things turn out. And I suppose I mean that even extends to my driving. Every single little thing about me is particular, and I guess that was shaped by the way I was raised and the circumstances around me. You know how it is.
Okay. There's an interesting tension in your story because you seem naturally outgoing and leader-like, but also very thoughtful and careful, as we you just touched on. Have you always felt caught between those 2 sides of yourself?
No, honestly, not particularly. In fact, a large critique I've had of most historical leaders is that they're not cautious enough. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the Napoleon quote. If I recall how it goes, so bear with me here. But about it's better to act on something impulsively than to ruminate on it too much and never act at all. I love that quote. I agree with it. But I do find that most people who are prone to effective socialization, high levels of charisma, very convincing, I find that they're very impulsive. They're charismatic because they just say the things they wanna say. They don't often have to consider it, and I think that comes out in a lot of their actions. I've never felt personally conflicted by it. In fact, I not to brag a little bit, I think it's a good standard to hold.
Absolutely. How does, maybe being careful versus making, like, quick decisions, how does it show up for you maybe it's different socially, academically, or emotionally? Is it all consistent, or are there different ways of you showing up in those different categories?
Well, I'd say it varies quite a lot. Uh, Sort of my different preferences and the different things I do, they sort of lean towards one or the other, rather. You know, philosophy is very thorough, calculated, considered. Political science is, well, really, it's an effective mix of the two. It's, you know, it's just as important to speak cogently as it is to have a cogent point, coherently as it is to have a cogent point, my bad. But I'd say that most of my interests tended to veer in one direction or the other rather than mingling the two.
You were identified as both gifted and having ADHD fairly young. When did you first realize your brain maybe worked differently than other people's?
This is a pretty horrible story, but it occurred to me. I think I was or so. I remember playing with little bricks, mega blocks in the play care before my parents came to pick me up, and I saw everybody else just kind of building stuff. You know, meaningless little collections of blocks. And I remember thinking, I should be putting this like towards something. I mean, obviously a little less eloquently and probably a little more intuitively than, you know, with words. But I do remember making bricks into as large of a brick as I could and then throwing it at people. You know, it was for a purpose, I guess.
Okay, and that was a moment where you just realized I think differently from others.
Yeah, yeah.
School seemed to come easily to you academically, but structure and consistency were harder. I believe you can always just validate along the way. Again, I'm leveraging my source when I bring these assumptive statements out. How would you describe your relationship with school growing?
Well, I never really enjoyed it all that substantially. I was a 70s student for most of my career until 12th grade, and that's kind of where I thought I would always sit. Because nothing about school really entertained me or interested me in a real substantial way. I thought that even as I got older, things that I had expected to become more sort of rational and interpretivist, it just kind of they were the exact same as middle school, except it was slightly more difficult material. And I thought, well, that's a little boring. It's not really fostering any sort of real substantial development in me. And I guess branching off of this, if you don't mind, I've always sort of held the opinion that schools should be as focused on cultivating independent critical thinking than anything else. You know, rather sort of like what is supposed to be university, rather wherein they present you with a point and you have to, you know, sort of refute it or embrace it or describe it. But you have to do all of this within your own words, and you have to ensure that you understand the concept by sort of teaching it and ensuring that you have the depth of comprehension. Not super great at wording this. I guess the best way to put it would be uh, Hegelian. You know, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You know, you'd want people to understand the thesis and the antithesis of an ideology or an idea or whatever it is, and then come up with their own independent synthesis through that. And then, of course, ideally, the high school pathway would be further synthesizing that idea.
Okay. So what I understand, just to complement what you were just saying in a way, is like you like diving deep into something, right? Like when it interests you. So if you take thesis, antithesis, and you're getting something in the middle there, is that is that what you're leading towards in terms of like giving somebody an opportunity to really dissect, go deep, formulate their own opinions and come up with something, I guess, in the middle, or just their independent idea of whatever they're trying to learn?
Yeah, yeah, I think we should be as focused as we conceivably can on making a generation of or further generations, I suppose, of real independent people with personal philosophies that have been sort of really deeply self critiqued and have sort of come through their own understanding of the world to this reasonable point. You know, I really want people to be more literate in that regard, more like philosophically, personally literate. I'd really love that if the average person sort of understood themselves and what they really believe more, because it would make them a little less susceptible to simple manipulation.
Going into that area of diving deep that into something that interests you, what are a couple of examples throughout, let's say, middle school, high school that you just had to know everything about?
I'd say the first one was probably philosophy, and then it went into politics because that's just a branch of philosophy, and then psychology because that's just a branch of philosophy, and then it went into, weirdly enough, music.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Music. What do you
Sure.
play? What's your jam right now?
I'm a pretty terrible instrumentalist, but I've got a great set of pipes, and I'm okay on the drums. But I don't even know how to describe it. I've always just loved music in the sense that it's it's like any other piece of art. You know, it's the deepest reflection of its own creator. Even the generic sort of really corporate stuff is a really substantial reflection of what the musician prioritized above all else. But I love good music, and I don't mean good as in like functionally talented or whatever. But I mean good music as in anything that really comes from the soul. I listen to a lot of stuff that sounds probably pretty objectively terrible, but it means a lot emotionally.
Cool. For me, when I was younger, music, playing an instrument, singing always seemed very intimidating, venturing into it. So the concept of singing and learning the vibrato that comes with all that, it was just seemed daunting. How did you approach learning how to sing when you first started on your journey with music?
I guess that's difficult. I've always sort of sang along to stuff in private. The biggest element of my journey was really learning to appreciate my voice as others appreciate it, which actually didn't happen until first semester of university when I met my buddy Finian. We went to some open mics together. We did some jams in his basement, and it occurred to me that I was better at singing than I thought. And sort of since then, I've been trying to really refine it because before I thought it was all right, but nothing really worth showing to the world. I thought I had better ideas in terms of like writing music and designing it than I did actually participating in it. But good friends can change that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Follow me with this thing. Music is an art, of course, right? But there's also a technical aspect of music that maybe you need to have an understanding of to exercise your art. How how do you approach the balance between technical and just letting art take its own path?
That's hard to say. I'd say the best kind of art in terms of music is the stuff that understands exactly what it's doing wrong. So like in a lot of the early jazz greats, they'll play around with music theory and ideas of atonality, but it'll be used really intentionally in order to create a really solid sound. And I guess that was sort of it's a fine line. You've got to know exactly what you're messing with to sound bad so that you can utilize that in juxtaposition with the stuff that sounds really good. And from that, you can create this really great harmony of emotions and feelings. And that's where some of my favorite music comes from. Ween calls it the brown stuff, the brown note. It's a play on Eric Clapton's brown note, but instead of Eric Clapton's note being like as perfect as you could, Ween's brown note was making the worst possible sound you could and still making it good.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, let's go back to this label of being gifted. How old were you when you were told that?
8 to 10.
Okay, so Atticus, you're 8 years old, you're gifted. What kind of mindset do you get when you're told something like that? Does it put pressure on you? Does it feel empowering? Is it a bit of both?
It didn't provide me with any real tangible benefit. I already kind of knew that I was different. I already kind of knew that I was bright. Exceptional was the term they used in terms of like giftedness, and I don't know, it never really benefited me in any real conceivable way because, if you're smart enough to be labeled as exceptionally gifted or whatever, then you're probably smart enough to figure out that you're intelligent and you really don't need somebody to tell you that. And all that gives you really is pressure. All of a sudden, being bright isn't just your little secret that you could take out in order to do something successfully, but it becomes sort of an expectation from the world around you. And all of a sudden, that little facade that you've been putting on, it doesn't work anymore because everybody already knows. And you go, well, scheisse, I'm ruined, right? There's
What kind of hints or indications did those that told you you were exceptionally gifted? What did they see in you that had them describe you that way?
If I had to guess, it was probably my ability to think deeply and communicate my thoughts effectively. I wouldn't say I've always been exceptionally good at mathematics. I've become better at it, certainly better than I was then. I'd like to think at the very least, but I've always had difficulty kind of doing things that I didn't enjoy or that required real tangible effort. Everything I've always been good at has been very on the spot, very intangible, philosophy, even psychology. In a modern way, it's a lot more tangible, but its foundations are super approximate. Always rocked with that more so than anything with really defined rules and concepts. And even within the rules and concepts, like in the rules and concepts of philosophy, they're often sort of mingled with and toyed around with. I've never enjoyed anything that couldn't be altered substantially. The nature of it couldn't be altered substantially. And I guess that's what really indicated that I was gifted to some extent, at the very least, was that I really enjoy intangible things, which most people have a problem with. Most people are better than math at math than I am because I just hate that it's too grounded. At least at the level that they teach in high school and university, I'm familiar that after a certain point, but I really don't want to do all that work to get to that point.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from there. So I would imagine many people assume intelligence automatically leads to discipline and success, but those are two very different things. What was your interpretation of, I'm exceptionally gifted, therefore I'm going to rule the world? Just as an example, did that ever show up for you? Or like when did you realize that being intelligent didn't necessarily mean that your success and discipline are automatically going to come?
This is going to sound kind of pretentious, probably, but I guess it occurred to me way before they diagnosed me. I thought about it really hard when I was a kid. And I thought to myself, and I stick to it now, I don't want to do anything within my life for a career, for example, that doesn't bring me satisfaction. Everything else outside of that is totally irrelevant. I don't want power. I don't want wealth. I don't want fame. I mean, wouldn't it be great to become a successful musician or philosopher and become famous from that? Sure. But that's only because it would provide real legitimacy to my lifestyle. It would allow me to sort of live off of the things I enjoy. The money is pretty irrelevant to me insofar as it can buy me a small house and point A to B automobile and my basic necessities. I've really never aspired for much more than subsistence.
Okay, this might tie into the next one because I mean that if that's your objective and your goal, you have the right to strive for that. But from what I understand, there's a lot of Atticus. You have a lot of potential. We see the potential in you. Was it frustrating to hear that stuff repeatedly from people? Like maybe you weren't getting to a level where others thought you should be, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, completely. It was infuriating. I was a very, very angry young man because that's all I ever heard. And it took me a long time to really stop caring. And no matter how much love is in their heart, or no matter how much sort of real desire they have for me to fulfill my goals, it's all pretty irrelevant to me. I love them and I wish them great success in their own individual lives. But the moment they really start policing mine insofar as the attainment of my goals goes, I really do stop caring. It took me a long, long time to get to that point.
Oh, I would imagine. You have adults when especially when you're a kid, you look up to them for, some guidance and that sort of thing, and you're hearing that repeatedly. Sometimes it just doesn't align with you innately, and it probably takes some time to trust yourself to know that that's not maybe necessarily true. You're seeing your potential in your own individual way. So I could imagine that would be a tough conflict. You've described shutting down when something doesn't come easily. Where do you think that comes from?
Really, I think it comes from the fact that, well, it's sort of a combination of the two elements that we've been sort of talking about up until this point. Um, ADHD is, well, there are really a couple ways of having it, but I surmise I've got the kind that produces sort of an insufficient amount of dopamine to do something unless you enjoy it to the point where it raises your dopamine to a baseline level at which you can do something. A lot of people will perceive that as laziness or incompetence or self-sighted or like selfishness or short-sightedness. But really, I would implore them to really just try out being as miserable as you possibly can and doing everything at the same level of everybody else.
I was curious to know if so the dopamine angle is actually an interesting one because when I saw that you described yourself as shutting down when things don't come easily, I was wondering if you might have perfectionist tendencies and if there was maybe a fear of failure disguised as a lack of effort. But are you committed to the baseline dopamine theory?
Well, that's one aspect. I would definitely say the secondary aspect is perfectionist tendencies. But that also comes from sort of, if I don't do it perfectly, why would I bother doing it at all? And if I don't enjoy it, then I probably won't do it perfectly. And so it's sort of they sort of twist around one another to create this really unfortunate cycle wherein you're not good at something and you don't want to do it because you can't do it perfectly, and it makes you miserable to do, so you're not going to do it, and thus you'll never improve.
Got it. I just asked about the perfectionist. I'm projecting a little bit myself because I know that that's shown up in my life a little bit, and it's unfortunately going through therapy. It's not like the perfectionist tendency is not something you can necessarily remove from yourself. You just almost have to manage, which is it's been an interesting balance, but I can see the two things intertwining as you say.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but you live with it, right?
Yeah. So I hear COVID was a major turning point for you, almost like you lost some of your spark during that period. Does that resonate with you? Maybe you can describe the early days of COVID and how it might have impacted you.
I would say it really ultimately stemmed from losing sort of my ability to socially organize with people. And historically, I've sort of filtered a lot of what I do through the people I surround myself with. I'll sort of bounce ideas off of other people and see what sounds good. And so when I couldn't do that, I sort of just ended up bouncing them off of myself. And with my perfectionist tendencies, it tended to result in extremely overdeveloped sort of personal philosophies and then extremely overdeveloped preferences for like how my life should go and what I should do. And all of that occupied so much room in my head that I found it difficult to focus on anything else. I found most of it pretty irrelevant at that point, and it was pretty difficult to overcome and understand that, as much as I hate it, as much as I would love to be, totally metaphysical. There is a physical world, and I've got to embrace it. And there are elements to it that define my life. And God, I don't know. I guess I just ended up spiraling in so many different ways. I found it sort of hard to catch up.
Yeah, I think quite a few of us have had that. I mean, COVID gave us the opportunity to spend a lot more time with ourselves. And if we have these tendencies, in your case, diving deep into things that you were interested in or that just stimulated you, I can imagine you letting it get out of control. I was the same way. Different topics I couldn't even tell you 2 things about today. Like, I went deep on stuff during COVID just because of the extra time, and I seem to have, been very interested in it, and it led to isolation and not being as social as I could have been, and it took some time coming out of COVID to reconnect with people and get used to face again. I don't know if you can relate to that, but I
Yeah, yeah, most certainly. It's tough. I still have problems with it.
Was there a period where you felt disconnected from the confident version of yourself you'd been earlier in life, like throughout the COVID times?
Well, I guess it all kind of started with COVID, but now it's sort of an everyday thing. You know what I mean? I used to be so sort of naturally poignant and energetic and confident. Now I have to work really, really hard to facilitate that. And I really do think it was COVID. I think most people my age were altered really substantially, potentially irreversibly by COVID during sort of the budding years of your social life. I mean, what I was 13, and all I sort of did was sit in my room and think. That's no way for a 13-year-old to be, and it certainly negatively impacted my social life and sort of created a poor foundation that I would base the rest of my life upon.
That's a tough thing to manage, of course. You're saying you're kinda working on the confidence thing. What are the things that you do? Maybe there's somebody out there listening that is experiencing that, where they just feel like they're not 100% themselves or showing up the way they wanna show up. Is there something you default to? Maybe it's an extracurricular thing, maybe it's reading or self-help books. What are some of the tips and tricks that you might use to just boost that confidence over time?
There are two things I do. One, I try to tie everything back to something I do care about, at least internally, maybe not vocally, but at the very least, I attempt to keep myself engaged and interested by internally tying it back to something I care about. And two is deluding yourself. You can never succeed without personal delusion. You have to thoroughly and utterly believe against all rational odds that you are the way you want to be, and you will subconsciously begin to mirror that. Every time I'm out in a social situation, I imagine that I am the greatest version of myself I could conceivably be and to act appropriately. Because otherwise, I'd be too bogged down by rational thoughts like, well, I know I'm not the best version of myself, and I know I've got flaws, and what if other people see them? But pure blind delusion. It always works,
Fake it till you make it subconsciously.
more or less.
Yeah. Let's get into post-secondary and your career exploration. So you've gone through a lot of different possible career identities. You've touched on psychology, philosophy, political science. I don't know if you mentioned law, teaching, or academia.
Always
Why
been
do you
interested in those.
Yeah, okay. So why do you think you're drawn towards fields centered around ideas and people outside of what you might have already mentioned in the beginning?
Right. So outside of the general nature of intangibility and, the fact that you can sort of build on them in new creative ways that involve constant critical thinking and a sort of reinforcement, and outside of all of that, I suppose, simply put, I really enjoy working with people. Uh Not normally, I won't lie to you, but once I get into a very particular mindset, I really do enjoy working with people. And it is all in servitude of that greater goal I mentioned earlier. The only thing I've ever wanted to do with my life, the only purpose I have is to change the world in a way that is so it is more substantial than I left it, than it was before I came in. So be it, court cases and changing the framework of modern law, be it philosophy and building upon existing ideas or creating a new one, be it political science and sort of instituting political and policy changes I'd like to see, be it academia and teaching a younger generation sort of the ideals. Like I mentioned earlier with my preferences for academia, it all just sort of boils down to me wanting to leave the world a better place than I found it.
That's a very very good place to be. I mean, some people just like to, do their own thing, not really have that broader concern, but it sounds like you legitimately have a genuine interest in, like you said, leaving the world in a better place.
It's a lot of pressure. It's kind of frightening. It's a lot to live up to. And realistically, you have to understand that you probably won't. But to me, just working towards that goal is enough. But there's nothing wrong with not wanting to. I don't blame a single soul for wanting to live a nice middle class life, the wife and kids, a dog. It's great. There's
Sure.
nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. Was changing directions in university difficult emotionally, or did it feel natural once you realized psychology wasn't the right fit anymore?
It felt pretty natural. I started off really enjoying psychology, and it occurred to me later on that as much as I love the academic rigor, and that's not a fault of the program, but a fault of my own. The rigor is great. The substantiality, it's great. The problem is I love rigor and substantiality when it's intangible. Philosophy, political science, something you could sort of interpret. And though psychology's got that sort of framework of interpretivism, a lot of the way it's done is incredibly objective. And that disappointed me a little bit. And I've heard it changes later on, but frankly, I wasn't exactly intending to become a psychologist anyway. I was hoping to use my psychology degree as a stepping stone to either politics or getting my master's or becoming a professor or what have you. Psychology was never really my main interest. So when that occurred to me, I was sort of fine doing that.
Okay, great. And I'll couple that question with the fact that there's sometimes a lot of pressure to listen to parents versus listening to yourself when making major decisions. And that could be, changing programs in school and that sort of thing. Did you have to balance maybe feedback that conflicted with the decisions that you wanted to make with your programming? How did you navigate those conversations with parents, or were they completely supportive?
My mother my mother was completely supportive. Um, which was really really great. A bit of a surprise to me. She just wanted to make sure my father and mother were totally supportive, insofar as I had made the proper um, sort of steps. Not necessarily just towards switching my program, but they also wanted to make sure that I really considered it and that I thought, yeah, I like this more than psychology, and it's not going to dampen my career to any capacity. My parents, as long as I made the appropriate steps, they were completely fine with it, which was refreshing.
And was it the same outcome that you had originally pitched? Did you see any changes in terms of what your plan might look like as you put pen to paper and you built the plan, or was it always as you envisioned it from the time you put the pen to paper in the beginning?
Nothing about any of my plans has ever been exceptionally concrete. I've always got six or so uh, backup ideas. I mean, really, I'd love to sort of primarily, although I know this can't really realistically pan out. Firstly, I would love to make it in the music world. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I'm always going to work towards it sort of secondarily. And then I suppose second, I would really love to get my master's and potentially my PhD in political science or philosophy, and then go into the political world. I've always been really interested in the UN, for example. I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. And I mean, what do I know? I'm just a kid from the sticks, but I do like to think that I could really substantially change something there. And then if I go to the philosophy route, I could either go into academics or like a TA, because there are lots of opportunities for Western TAs into profession, or I could just work within that general field. Although that's kind of a pipe dream, eh? And then from there, I've got law. Once I'm done my post secondary, to do my master's, or I can go to law school. And a political science master's is pretty handy. They're always looking for political ins in the city of Stratford, which I mean, I'd love to get out of as soon as possible. But if they can get me a job there, that would be great. And then there are a lot of others, and I just don't want to get into those. But you get the
Yeah,
idea.
but you've actually illustrated what a lot of people are probably going through right now, and that is lots of options, lots of avenues to explore. We don't know at this point what the actual right one is versus, what might not be a fit. So, how are you feeling as you approach these options? Are you feeling somewhat confident that you're leaning towards one or the other? And I'll follow that up with, in an ideal world, you have a magic wand. What does success honestly look like to you right now?
I suppose to answer the first question, I know what my parents want me to do, and I know what I'd like to do. And truthfully, I'd be happy if I spent the rest of my life busking in the streets of Toronto or LA and doing nothing really substantial with my life. I know it's not exactly in servitude of my greater goal, but I'd be content with that. But I know my parents wouldn't be, so I would be probably, and again in servitude of my greater goal, I'd probably want to pursue the political avenue.
And you would have a legitimate interest in pursuing.
Lots.
Okay, just checking in on that. All right, work. You currently work multiple jobs, including quieter, more behind the scenes environments. What do you
Mhm.
enjoy about these spaces?
I like having the time to think. That's all I do in my janitorial job. All I do is I sit and I think and I do mindless menial work. and my mother hates it, but I really wish she could understand just how happy it makes me. I don't really mind the work. It's a decent exercise, it's something to do, but it's something to occupy my hands while I'm thinking or listening to music and really planning on what I'd want to do with the music I'm hoping to make. I mean, I love the amount of time it gives me to just think. There aren't whole lot of jobs that do that.
Well, I can relate. I was a caretaker myself, and I can 100% agree where you're coming from. It was quiet. I used to work the afternoon shifts. So when the bells rang and the kids went home, teachers went home, it was a great time to either think or listen. I listened to the radio at the time. There was no podcast and that sort of thing. But I remember writing out business plans, not executed quite yet though, but I still remember what the concept was, and I still might eventually follow through with it, but totally understand where you're coming from there, and I absolutely agree. A lot of good time to just get things organized in the mind.
Yeah, it's beautiful, really. I enjoy it so much. I
And
just have so much time to make everything perfect in the way I want it, like physically speaking. And then, well, mentally, I've just got 8 to 12 hours to do whatever I want. It's great.
mhm. So you recently won a customer service award at the YMCA. Did
Yeah,
that
you've done your
so much?
research.
Yeah. Did receiving that recognition mean something to you?
It meant that they couldn't fire me.
Was that a concern?
No, but, in case it ever comes up.
Okay. Do you think jobs give you something school doesn't, like structure, autonomy, or maybe immediate feedback?
Autonomy, above all else. I really enjoy just being able to work how I'd like. For example, when I work at the Revival House as a line cook, I just really enjoy how much sort of I can really make the food my own. I really enjoy that autonomy. Autonomy's always been sort of my central desire, my central goal. As you can imagine, growing up with so much structure and expectation, all I've really wanted to do is how do you? I'm going to avoid cursing. I guess I'm not really sure how. I just bugger it. I really don't. I want to be free of it all. I want to be rid of it all, and it's just nice to have that little bit of autonomy. Then, of course, I go home or I go back to school, and there's the structure again, and it's nice to be free.
I'm gonna touch on, a little of a personal home situation, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It was mentioned the years following, your parents' divorce were difficult. Can you just let us know how old you were at the time and maybe talk about some of the struggles that, you might have endured through the early years of the divorce and how and maybe looking back, how you think that period affected you?
Yeah. I guess I took the divorce the way you really could expect any 14-year-old to. I sort of expected it. My parents, lovely people individually, always done their best. Um, I suppose it's up to debate whether or not they sort of did everything right, but they always did their best given their circumstances, and I will always respect and appreciate them for that. But they were better individually, and it took my mother a long time to figure that out. I like to think she's got it settled now.
And how did it, impact you, like, looking back? Were you're saying they separated when you were 14, which means you were in COVID,
Mhm.
which doesn't help.
No, certainly not. I think looking back, it taught me about the unpredictability of things that you can expect security in. I remember being a lot younger than 14 and thinking, well, I'm pretty sure my parents are going to divorce when I go to college. I didn't expect it to occur before that. And I guess it taught me that as much as people worship structure, it's because structure is ultimately dependent upon people, founded by people, and utilizes people in its everyday systems. It's just structure is never something that you can ever replace agency with. It's never worth it because all of that structure you really think you gain, it doesn't mean anything. It's all going to eventually something's going to crop up with it. And you will have traded it something substantial away for something temporary. It really solidified what I believe now, really.
Were you worried about what other people thought?
No, my parents are exceptionally private people. It's something I've always really liked about them. My father is the single most private person I know, and my mom is very, very social, of course, but more of her personal details are kind of kept to herself. I didn't know, like, I didn't have many friends at school that knew my parents in that sort of way, except for Max. But well, I talked with him about the potential of divorce a lot, so I'm pretty sure he saw it coming. It never really impacted my social life, just my life at home, and it kind of made me resent being at my house. Still carries over today.
When you think about self leadership, what does that phrase mean to you personally right now?
The ability to control my actions in accordance with how they're perceived by other people. It's not quite as independent as I guess the wording leads itself to, but I've always been pretty independent. So when I think of how I could develop my self leadership, it always ends up going to the realm of, well, how can I make sure that it works for other people? I've always been lost in my own head. I've always had a little bit of difficulty describing everything because then I'd have to go back and back and back, and I'd have to elaborate and then elaborate and then elaborate, and that's kind of exhausting. So learning to be, concise and sort of shortening my points down so that they can be understood by other people. It's been a really substantial, important thing I've been trying to work on. Even my buddy Finian, we have constant philosophical conversations, and I find sometimes I'm a little too. I don't really want to say pedantic. It's probably an appropriate term, but it makes me look bad, right? So I guess I'm too particular. And sometimes I see things in a very specific, particular sense when they're communicated as such, instead of sort of just trying to see the broader picture of what's attempting to be communicated. So I guess just controlling the way I see things and the way I talk about things in a way that makes sense for other people as much as it does for me.
What areas of your life right now feel like they're genuinely improving?
Tough question. I guess I would have to say I have a lot more agency, which is nice, but I really don't. I have a lot more agency in terms of personal decisions, but the consequences of my decisions are more substantial now than ever. So I guess I have theoretical agency, but I can't reasonably act on it. I'm working more than ever. I'm busier than ever. I have less time for my friends. I have less time for myself. I guess something that really is improving is I'm able to exercise my preference for music more. I guess I'm able to go to more open mics and play with my buddies and that sort of thing.
That has to be a great time. I envy that, honestly. If I had a magic wand myself, I'd probably learn how to be a performer of some capacity.
Anybody can do it. I mean, you run a podcast, you do a social job, right? You could be a great actor, you could be a great director. You could put yourself to any of it.
Where were you 20 years ago?
I have
All
to
right.
talk to my father for that one.
Okay, we're gonna get into the lightning round, Atticus. So I'm
You
gonna
got it,
ask
man.
you a series of questions, and you're going to be as quick as possible. And this will help you. You said refining answers.
Oh yeah.
Here you
Oh
go.
yeah.
Okay, one book that influenced you,
Thus Spake Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. A better fiction book would be Alas Babylon.
a class you unexpectedly loved,
I did not think I would love nature studies as sort of an extension of the history class I did in 12th grade as much as I did. I loved nature. And I just didn't think I thought the studies would take all the fun out of it, and they didn't. I enjoyed it.
something you wish people your age talked about more honestly.
Personal politics and philosophy. I think too many people wrap it up in too many veneers, and it makes most of their points pretty self-contradictory. It makes them hard to understand, and it makes them seem more foolish than they really are.
Biggest motivator right now.
Same motivator that's always been. All I ever want to do is change something substantially. Everything else is mere salad dressing.
Okay, one quality you admire most in other people.
I mean, I'd love to say intelligence. That's probably the answer that I agree with most, but really it's earnestness. I've met a lot of people who maybe weren't all that smart, but they were certainly honest and they were certainly curious. And all they ever wanted to do was talk about it honestly and learn more. And I've respected them more than I've respected 100 intellectuals I've met throughout my life.
One thing you hope your future self thanks you for.
Not compromising anything I believe in for the sake of other people. I've done that a lot and I don't want to do it anymore.
Good for you. I got a final question in general.
Groovy.
If someone your age is listening right now and feels behind, uncertain, or disconnected from who they used to be, what would you want them to hear?
Inevitably, you're going to be disconnected from the person you used to be because the fact that you used to be them is an indicator that you're not them anymore. Disconnection from your former self is as simple a facet of life as driving or walking down the street. And change has to occur. It's not always going to be positive, it's not always going to be nice, but all of that negative change and all of those horrible things that occur to you are inevitably going to make you a different person from who you were. And it's useless to grab onto the past and grab onto who you were in hopes that you can remain that way forever. Stagnancy is the killer of the mind.
Well put, my friend. Did you have that written out or something?
No,
I say that facetiously. I know you didn't, but that's some truth right there. Atticus, that's all I got.
groovy, man.
I
I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I did too. I really appreciate you making the time. I know you've been busy with exams and all that good stuff, and yet you're making the time to get this in with your jobs and all that. You're clearly a very bright individual, and I wish all the best for you in terms of making that change you're seeking to do, because we need more minds like this out there making the changes for a more positive world. So thanks again, Atticus. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, man. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope this takes off. I think this is a really neat format, and I'd love to hear this from people who are maybe a little more interesting than myself.
You're being too hard on yourself. Okay, thanks again, buddy.
Hey, no problem. Have a good one.
This conversation with Atticus was a reminder that self leadership doesn't always look polished from the outside. Sometimes it looks like questioning everything. Sometimes it looks like changing direction, or maybe it looks like struggling with structure, confidence, or motivation, while still having a strong sense that you want your life to mean something. What stood out to me was Atticus's honesty about the gap between how people may see us externally and what we're actually experiencing internally. He spoke openly about curiosity, ADHD, perfectionism, COVID, autonomy, and the pressure that can come with being told that you have potential. But underneath all of that was a clear theme. Atticus wants to understand himself, stay connected to what he believes in, and hopefully leave the world a little better than where he found it. And for students, recent grads, or young professionals listening, I think there's something important in that. You don't need to have the perfect plan to be moving forward. You don't need to be the same person you were before COVID, before a major life change for that matter, or before things get complicated. As Atticus said, change is part of life, and holding on too tightly to who you used to be can keep you from becoming who you're meant to be next. Thanks again, Atticus, for joining me. And thanks everyone for listening to Flashback Files. We'll see you on the next one.